Hello, and welcome to Creative Vitality Jam Sessions. Here we have intimate conversations with extraordinary dance and theater artists about reimagining creativity and supporting and building community. CVJS and I walk in solidarity and as allies for equality, justice, and respect. Black Lives Matter, and let's stop Asian hate. Let's unite. I'm Helen Pickett, and today's guest is Richard Chen C., a freelance dance teacher, coach, and regisseur. We have known each other since 2010, where we were earning our MFAs from Holland University together. Richard, welcome. I'm so happy to see you again.
Yay, it's great to see you. I am so thrilled to actually get to see you. It's been so long.
I know. It's I don't know about you, but the pandemic and these talk shows have really I've connected so much to friends again, and it's been a big joy throughout the pandemic, to see.
I've taken the opportunity to take a look at some of them, and I have to admit I'm a little intimidated by your guest roster is just amazing. It's just
Well, thank you. But they're friends. I mean, you know how it is in the world, right?
No, absolutely. And what's also surprising is a little bit of crossover that I'm seeing in terms of people that I didn't know that you really knew that well, and it's like, oh yeah, I do know some of those people.
I mean, it is a small world. It really is. It really is. 6 degrees of separation. But
I think a little bit less with us.
Exactly. Well, first of all, anybody who's been through the Hollands program, we're like family.
Exactly. Absolutely.
That was a game-changing event for me. It was really mind-blowing. It was amazing. So thank you to everybody there. But I always like to start these interviews by asking what part of the world you're in.
I happen to be in Vienna, Austria, and I've only been here for a week, but that's where I am for the next 5 weeks.
Lovely. I hope the weather can be a little weird now. I hope the weather starts getting nice for you because it has a lot of trees, so the blooms can be quite beautiful.
They're just starting to bud, so I will get to see full bloom before I leave. So I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah, no, it's a beautiful city.
It is. I got my baby's breath and out for you today. So I'm like wafting in this wonderful, soft smell of baby's breath. It's very nice.
Well, I'm staying in the apartments over at the Stadsballet, and they're a little austere, and it was just so plain. I went out and got some orchids just to help add a little color for us here. So
I was going to say your corner is very nice. I love the tiny lampshade. It's a little bit Alice in Wonderland.
Yes.
And the giant orchid. It's really wonderful.
I'm taking advantage of what I can. It's got to feel like home. You're on tour.
I know. No. I mean, I'm with you. With traveling so much, I do try to create a home space every place I go.
Yeah.
It's important when you travel so much. But we're going to get into that because you love to travel. But I want to start with this most recent 2018 Fulbright Fellowship in which you were the recipient under the disciplines of classical ballet and modern dance forms in the USA. You were awarded the Academic and Professional Excellence Award to go to India. Please tell us more about this time in India. It sounds so fascinating. How your area of study evolved while you were there, because I'm sure there was a wonderful adaptation throughout this process, and what you learned and how this work might have shifted your perspective, in terms of imparting knowledge.
Yeah. I have to go back a little bit further than that to 2016. And I'm a freelance regisseur and coach and, you ask me to do it, I'll figure out if I can do it. That's part of my creative practice, and I was sort of not really feeling like I had a solid path that I wanted to do. And this opportunity came up through the Paul Taylor Dance Foundation, where a school in India was asking if anyone from the Taylor Company or the Taylor Foundation would be interested in coming to teach in India for 6 months to a year. So I got that opportunity and I started to talk to them, and we went through all the negotiations, and then right towards the end of it in 2017, I finally got them to say to me, we're going to pay you an Indian wage while you're here. And that would have been fine if I didn't have my own sort of home expenses that I had to cover in the US. Yeah. So it would have been a good wage for living in India, but not really a great wage to cover my expenses to be away for 6 months to a year. So it occurred to me, I had been a Fulbright specialist in 2011 in New Zealand. So I knew about the Fulbright Foundation, I knew about their potential, but I had never applied for a full grant. And a full grant gives you the freedom to get paid the stipend from Fulbright under the condition that you take no payment in the country where you're stationed.
Oh.
So it's this ironic type of thing where I go and I apply for it, and you apply for it in a general term as a project. You don't sort of go specifically right away to, I want to work with this institution and this is what we're going to do. So I had to come up with, a project. And what I found out in my research was that there had been very, very few dance people that I could find, almost none that I could find, who had actually gone to India as like an independent teacher, but not specifically doing research. Oh. Almost all of the dance people in Fulbright that had gone to India were doing research on Indian dance. Yeah. And then I was being contacted specifically because I was representing American dance forms. I was representing Paul Taylor American as American modern dance. They had had some exposure when the Taylor Company had performed in India, and they were just interested in expanding to what I found out when I went to India was the disciplines of Western dance. Now, if you say Western dance to me in the United States, I think of line dancing and cowboy boots, but for them, Western dance covers everything from jazz to classical ballet to contemporary forms, modern, that is the West to them. Wow. So I was, I did this project representing my background in classical ballet and all the research that I had done to not be trained in the US, but then find my career performing in the US, both in classical ballet and modern dance. Yeah. And of course, the great sort of nexus of being a Taylor dancer for 15 years gave me that opportunity to start delving into the background of Paul with Martha Graham and his contemporaries with people like Alvin Ailey, Carmen de Lavalade, the Horton traditions, and then you bring in all the Dunham traditions, and then I'm from Jamaica in the West Indies. So this combination.
I'm sorry, I have to cut you off. Tell us who your next door neighbor was when you were growing up.
He was actually my next door neighbor, but he used the studio next door. The house next door got turned into a recording studio, and it was Bob Marley. Yeah. Bob Marley, he was my neighbor. He was neighbor Bob to me, and it was just very funny because after I left Jamaica, I was just like, everyone was talking about Bob Marley, and it's like, yeah, he's my neighbor. I was like,
awesome. I'm sorry. I had to interject that. Bob Marley, man. Come on, Bob Marley. Anyhow, so there we were. Go ahead, continue.
So anyway, I applied for the grant and I got it. And I got it as a senior teaching scholar that I would be going. And Fulbright is great because it really is about idea and international exchange. Is really what it's about. It is based in academia. It is based in the fact that you have to have a master's or a terminal degree of some sort within your discipline, and that what you are doing is progressing research in the field. But it does not require you to leave a document behind.
Oh.
So yeah, I mean, it's just simply money that you're going to do, and you do have to fulfill certain requirements, where it's like you're going to work with a minimum of 3 institutions, you will have a home institution, you will be working a minimum of X number of hours in that specific project that you put forth. But that's as open as it is.
Wow. So where were you based, or what schools did you work with? What cities were you based in?
I was based primarily in Mumbai and Delhi. And then I also, through this kind of winding connection, ended up teaching down in Goa, down in the south in Kerala. And the fascinating thing about, you talk about what do I learn? I grew up in a post-British colonial country, which is what India is. I grew up in a developing country, which is sort of really doesn't have a professional dance company. And then, it formed its own national dance company in 1962 when it gained its independence. And that company were people who had day jobs. I mean, they worked for the telephone company, they were lawyers, but they loved dance. And they came together and they formed a company that was a part of its national identity, utilizing all of our background about what we did. Ska and reggae were born in Jamaica. And that came out of these Africanist, Afro-Caribbean traditions, which is what I grew up with. I was born there, I grew up there. And then on top of that, we were post-colonial. So we had these British expatriates who were teaching ballet, and then a lot of the dancers there, some of them ended up in the Ailey Company and ended up in the Graham Company, and people like Clive Thompson, and and they went abroad, and they were in England. And so a lot of those connections were there. That was, Jamaica became this melting pot of dance styles, which were sort of Afro-Caribbean and Graham, Horton-based, and then ballet, because of and it was very British ballet, like Cicchetti and the traditions that you got from that Royal Academy of Dancing School. So, a lot of the training there, which I ended up going through. I ended up being trained in the Cicchetti syllabi as well as the RAD, and then finally going to England to start my career as a ballet dancer, not as sort of this West Indian, and that actually, as I reflect right now, was speaking a little bit to that sense of otherness when you aren't in the majority. And so I go to India, and all of a sudden, here's this giant country that's right on that cusp of where Jamaica was in 1962. Wow. There are a number of dancers there who, have had training. They went outside of India and they came back, but there's no audience or real exposure other than on YouTube and television to jazz and ballet and modern and contemporary. They just really don't have that. They've got their traditional forms, which were only codified actually primarily by Germans, who came in and did research on the Oriental dances. and so we're going back to Anna Pavlova, and it dawned on me that I was making this connection while I was there between the roots of American modern dance and Orientalism, taking the notch dances of Ruth St. Denis and all of these people. And the fact that Rukmini Devi Arundel and Anna Pavlova and that early period was the start of the first training schools, academies in dance in India. Because otherwise it had always been this, guru shishya system where you would just go and study with a guru, but there was no idea of an academy, a more sort of structured environment. It was always based on the individual. And it's still very much, within that scope of you're going to work and train with the head of this particular training environment.
Okay.
But that concept of where was that evolving and how were they trying to get their love of dance out into the greater world was to try and bring influences with ballet, with modern, with contemporary, with contact improv to India. But the dancers had very little exposure other than just those individual teaching environments. And so that's growing. And so to be there in that point in time is just to see, what I think the evolution must have felt like in the early 40s in the US and in the 50s and 60s in places like Jamaica. And then also the familiarity of Mumbai is about the same latitude as Kingston, Jamaica.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I know that.
It's very tropical.
It's a wonderful city. I really love Mumbai, and I started cracking up when I heard Goa because it's another place I love and I've been to, and I was never in Kerala. Delhi is a teeming city, and we were kind of at the end of our very long travels. So Delhi felt overwhelming when I was there. It's a teeming city. But this is totally off topic. Where did you stay in Mumbai?
So I actually stayed in Andheri West, which is a little bit north of the city.
Was that near the school?
It was very near the school. So to explain, with Fulbright, you have to have a primary institution. And so once you get your grant, you look for a primary institution. And I ended up working with DanceWorks, which is led by Ashley Lobo, who also has a company called Navdara India Dance Company. And so this, it's interesting because it's not sort of in the real heart of Mumbai. And there are a lot of ghettos and it's a very, very poor section of it. And yet at the same time, I ended up feeling like I was a teenager when I was there, because that's exactly what the environment felt like when I was growing up in Kingston. So it's this weird dichotomy of here I am coming representing this US environment. And I think the greatest compliment anyone paid me was someone who was there. She was from Japan and she'd been working in Germany and Israel, and she was trained at Ruttenberg. And she's been in India for 7 years, 8 years probably at this point. And she said to me, I'm one of the first people that she said, India did not seem to affect me when I got there. It's like you have this either you love it or you hate it.
Oh yeah.
India just absorbs you in and you become a part of it, or it's really not a great experience for you and you think it's exotic. And for me, it literally was just I feel like I'm a teenager at high school. It's like, okay, this is what it feels like to go to school, trudging to work, and it's hot and it's humid and it's smelly.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing. Full circle, right? And what a kind of
Yeah,
catharsis, a cathartic moment, catharsis.
yeah, and so the timing was, talk about eventful and cathartic. Paul Taylor went into the hospital 3 days before I got on the plane to fly to India for 6 months. I got on the flight from New York to London, and when I landed in London, I got the message that Paul had died. And then I went from there to India, and you go through all the things that you go through. And I know that I'm not going to be able to leave and go back to gather with everybody else to celebrate and honor it. And that was the point at which I also started thinking, who are we that are left behind that represent and maintain legacy? You know, I noticed, like, you know, when we talk about people like yourself, you worked with Bill and Megan Williams, who, you know, work for Mark Morris, and Bill and Mark are still very active and very alive and very involved with things. And I had that great opportunity to be working with Paul Taylor in that kind of capacity. Yet I fall now into that category of those dancers that danced with Balanchine and created work, and then were still, you know, now responsible for looking at what is that artistic ether that they, you know, put into the world that we kind of become the shepherds for. Yeah. You know, and it was a very profound sort of transition of needing to think about myself differently, because I couldn't go to Paul and say, what do you think if I make this decision when staging this work? Or, you know, we can talk to other people, but it's his name that's on that work, and it made that stamp. You know, and so being there, needing to also explain, like, what is American modern dance? What is my perspective on ballet, and how did those traditions feed each other into something new in the United States? You know, and it literally is like teaching dance history 101 based on the new world as India might see it. You know, and it was interesting because I probably worked with about 7 different institutions. I spent more time in Uber than I did on the ground, I think, getting around Mumbai, going to every different studio, teaching on a regular basis, you know, 3-4 classes a day, you know, 6 days a week. And then going from there to Delhi, spending 6 weeks in Delhi, and again, setting up to do lectures as well as teaching master classes. Had a wonderful opportunity to meet people there. And that was the other thing. As a Fulbrighter, I'm calling up these people, like I'm emailing them before I go and say, hey, I have a Fulbright, I have a grant, and I can come in and offer you all of these things, anything you want, let me see what we can do, but you can't pay me. And it sounds too good to be true. And if you come from a developing country, you don't trust anybody that says, I'll give it to you for free. And it wasn't until I was actually on the ground in India and I turned up on their doorstep and said, look, see, I'm physically here. Now what do we do? You know, and it's amazing. It just snowballs from there. All of a sudden it's like, oh, you really are here. Oh, you really don't want me to write you a check? It's like, I can't take the check because if I take that check, it comes out of my pay. And so I may as well just get paid. you know. So it's like, you know, it was hilarious.
Amazing, amazing. I learned so much in your. Well, I always remember you as a very fastidious student, also in during our time at Hollins, and I just learned so much from you in this answer, and also for people thinking of Fulbright. So
Yeah.
that was amazing. So, Richard, moving on. You
Yes.
have more than 40 years as an active member in our dance field as a teacher and regisseur. 30 years as a performer with companies such as Northern Ballet Theatre, that's in England, Oakland Ballet, around this in Oakland, California,
Right.
ODC, San Francisco, as well as independent projects, and you danced for 14 years, as you said, with Paul Taylor. You covered a lot of that already, and we're going to get that into it another question. But with such a wealth of knowledge spanning many years, how have you reimagined your view of art and art making, right? Because you also you're a creator and art making. And as you said, kind of the shepherd now of a big art maker, right?
Right.
How has your multitude of experiences shaped your life now? And what has emerged as important and how you carry on in your creative life?
Big question.
Well, yeah, three-parter. So if you want me,
Yeah.
so
No, no, no.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, I think I want to look at it slightly differently, because as a child, since I had the great fortune, um, you know, I think especially in the US, we don't often hear as much from men who started when they were very young. And I never understood what dancing was. I just knew I had an affinity for it. And I didn't have an environment where I had a lot of exposure to it, especially classical ballet. But I love to read. I cannot remember a time when I could not read. I mean, literally, I was like 3 years old and I'm reading comics, and you know, people were coming by and realizing that I was actually reading. I wasn't just looking at pictures. And I remember, I remember sort of getting this book out of the library, which had these photographs, not just of ballet, but it actually was covering, I'm forgetting what, I can picture it. I mean, it had a Nicolai costume set on the cover, and it had a representation of Netherlands Dance Theatre, representation of the Royal Ballet, it had a representation of like all these dance companies around the world with these things, with these pictures of just graphic images of dancers. And I was always fascinated by it. And I had the opportunity because there was a British expatriate who was looking for boys for the school. And she came to see our athletic demonstration, and my physical education teacher was one of her students. And that was how I got into ballet. I mean, literally, it was just like I got scouted in a way, and then I got into ballet. And 3 years later, I was offered a scholarship to go to the Royal Ballet School. And then 2 years later after that, I ended up going. And at that point, for me, it was an escape off of the island. When you grow up on a small island, you do get what they call island fever. And it's like, you know, I got to go. Going back to Bob Marley's sort of edict to people in Jamaica was go and gain the knowledge of the world and bring it back with you. That is what's going to bring Jamaica forward in its life. And you know, I went to England and I had no clue what I was getting into. I didn't know what dance was. You know, I thought dance was, especially in ballet, you get told exactly what to do. So, you know what it is. You have to go through your syllabus. You everything was there. And I danced in England for 3 years. I was an apprentice, and I ended up with the issue of the start of the European Union, what was originally a European community. And so as a Commonwealth citizen, I couldn't get a visa to stay. So I went back to Jamaica, and that's how come I ended up applying to get a green card to go to the United States. And then I went to the US. So that transition happened. And it was in the US for the very first time I was working with Oakland Ballet. And the NEA had an initiative during the late 70s to bring modern choreographers into ballet companies, like to give money to modern choreographers that were dancing and working in the field. So Tandy Beale, who used to dance for Alwyn Nicolai and then became an independent on her own and still working, was working with Oakland Ballet. And that was the very first time. I mean, I had done great repertory up until then. I had done Green Table. I had done, Peter Cled doing his version of Coppelia. I had done Swan Lake. I'd done Gesturing. I'd done the classics. And then I learned Billy the Kid. I'd learned the Americana classics. I was starting to do that stuff when I was in the US, and I'd never done an original dance.
Oh.
So I'd never had a work created on me. That was a brand new experience for me. And here we are 5 years into my career. But 5 years into my career, I'm 21 years old.
Yeah.
So it's, I'm still like a baby going like, what is this? Yeah. And that shifted. And I think as that shift happened, I started to recognize, really as a performer, as a dancer, interpreting stuff, it is very similar, whether or not you're doing a repertory work or whether or not you're doing a brand new work, because it's all new to you. Like the very first time I'm learning it, it's brand new to me. And I have to figure out what is the intent of the choreography? What is that? So that became that kind of driving force for that sort of middle part of my career. Mm. And then practicality comes in. I love the Balanchine quote where, somebody asks him, it's like, where do you get inspiration? Like, how do you start a piece? And his answer is essentially, I'm paraphrasing, the money comes first. It's like, what am I going to do in order to pay the bills, right? So, that's sort of where it's going. And I needed to get a job with a company that was working more consistently. I auditioned for Taylor, complete open call, and lo and behold, I'm 31 years old and I get the job. And I'm like, oh dear, now I've got a job. I'm moving to New York. I'm like doing something completely different again. And I'd never worked for a company that had a single choreographer, like a single choreographer company. I'd always worked for rep companies. It is rare.
It's rare. Yeah.
Well, I think it's rare in our generation. I think it was less rare earlier on. Because
yes, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, coming out of that, that's sort of there. And I was terrified because I didn't know whether or not I would get bored. And I thought, I'm really lucky with somebody like Paul Taylor, because he himself will tell you, try not to get caught in the same room as more than one of your own selves.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, because it's sort of like it seems like this like multiple personality when you're starting to do the work, because for him, a creative process meant not repeating yourself. Mm. So if he was working on a comic piece, he would work on a dark piece next, or a lyrical piece, or then after that, he'd go back, but he would steal from himself. And then I found, having the opportunity to spend 15 years with him, he learned to narrow the focus of the individual piece, where what he was doing, he never wanted to see the early works again. And I once asked him why, and he said, they were my genitive works. They were when I was developing my voice. The later works, you can see he's taken maybe 5, 10, 15 seconds of an early work, and he's expanded it into this 20-minute piece, So that all, that still feeds my sense of what is it to be creative? Not that I have to be a choreographer, but that, it takes all kinds of creativity to get inside of ideas and then get those ideas out.
So this you kind of went into that next question really fluidly, because next question was about also the identity that you created as an artist was through in process, of course, the time in Oakland Ballet and all the processes that you went through, but this time with Paul and being in process and being with a person who advocated, don't repeat yourself, which is kind of like, it's not a hackneyed phrase, but you hear it all the time, but it's so true. It's like to be representational rather than just dropped in. That can be a trap in art. And so it's, you kind of went into that next question, because this long-term relationship built your idea of creative identity and of self, of how you were going to be in the world as well, right? As participating in participating in the furthering of knowledge.
Right.
And how one does that.
Yeah. And it's very much also when I think of creativity, I also think of personal courage. I think it takes us an enormous amount of courage to recognize, but also we kind of need access. We need access, whether or not that's granted by, our own ability to push or society's ability to accept. And I will say, I thought that dance was the best place in the arts for me to go, because it was one of the first places where non-traditional casting started to exist. If you think about it, we talk about the cliches, and I was thinking about this when I was trying to figure out how could I be in the arts, like when I'm a kid, and we're talking, 40 years ago, and looking at things on movies like Charlie Chan, and the Chinese are always in the laundry and they're always represented as the waiters, and and actually some of them are very rich characters. I remember watching Hop Sing on Bonanza, going, it's like he actually has a certain heart and strength that no one sort of recognizes, and it's like, you take that as a cue to say, even within playing a character, you can be an individual, you can be distinguishable. And working with Taylor, working in dance ultimately gave me that opportunity to go beyond just not seeing this Asian person who doesn't sound Asian, because I come from Jamaica and most of the time I sound like this, and I'm just like, that's not right. I don't get that connection.
Right.
And being able to step beyond that, not just how people perceive me, but I can help change your perception of what you may have thought was there beforehand. And I have to be grateful to every director and every piece of choreography I got to do that was not built for necessarily a traditional look that would have been me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a legacy you're leaving as well. You're again, so you said the word courage, and this is a word I really attribute to dancers and to artists, right? But you also you're an example, and that's so important these days. No, you are. You're an example, right? You're like I'm a woman in a leadership position. I'm an example
Right.
for young people to see that you're an example of an artist who has had a huge career in all kinds of dancing arts, and little kids look
Right.
up to you and say, if he can do that, I can do that. That's what I mean.
Right.
And that's so important in how we impart knowledge as well, right? To be present and do our art.
No, and I just have to say, I was listening to the Royal Ballet had done a talk with the dancers of color in the Royal Ballet Company about what it meant to them to be in ballet and to be dancers of color. And I thought it was really interesting because one thing that was said by one of the dancers that really resonated with me was that, those of us who grow up as minorities, especially in a field where we are told we have to be exceptional in order to be in that field, I think most of us feel like we always have to apologize for ourselves. And not saying that we have to. I'm just saying we feel like we have to, because
Well,
it's
it's
sort
called
of,
the imposter syndrome.
yeah. And that's imposed upon us, which is why I go back to that concept which you were saying about courage. So I have to say, I feel a little sheepish, and I almost want to say, I'm sorry, I'm really not that good. But it's sort of, when you say that, it's like I have learned over the years that I wouldn't be where I am today if I were not good.
That's
You
right.
know, that's the difference. It's like you have to you must learn to accept the reality that is with you. Like, these opportunities are not just because I talk well. These opportunities are because I actually produce something, and we have to learn to give ourselves that permission. And I think as dancers, many of the times we don't learn how to do that for ourselves, because our process in rehearsal is always being told what we're not doing correctly. And again, it's just the environment. It's like Betty DeYoung, who, had been dancing with Taylor since 1962 and is still their rehearsal director. She'll turn around and say, sometimes it just isn't time to tell the dancers that they're good, because there's so much else to tell them. And it's like, they have to know that because they're there, they're good.
Yeah.
But we need to hear it, and I try so hard when I'm working with dancers to remind them, this is not easy.
Yeah.
And you are here because you are good.
That's right. I mean, I think that way of teaching, that is really spreading far and wide now. I also believe in that way of teaching. A lot of the contemporaries, our generation, are those teachers that are really spreading that. And I had teachers as well that gave me that, along with the teachers that thought it was, the best way to teach was to break someone down. Which never worked for me because I am a natural rebel. But I'm not discounting the earlier teachers, because we all have examples of that, right? And they were products of their past as well. But
Right. And we found our way to strengthen our back against that.
yeah, we did. Yeah.
I mean, I definitely feel like the fact that I know I survived in those environments gives me courage as I get older, where I don't have the drive to fight through a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I will say, it works to a great benefit in some ways, which is that I can go into a studio and I'll be working and I can sense the chaos and the drama and the just angst that the dancers are going through, and not let it affect me. Because I love the concept that what we are there to do is to create art, and creating it does take work.
Yeah, exactly. It takes work, and it also takes working through if you're having a bad day. I don't mean an injury, but
no,
it also has to do with like, this is also a job and it's work.
right.
And if you were in a quote unquote regular job, if you are having a bad day, again, not sick or not injured, you went to work.
Right.
And I think that's a very important point.
Yeah.
And I think, like you, process the work was some of my best memories.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the work involved in that, like, it sits with me so strongly as joy.
Yeah.
Part of what we did.
This is how we became who we are. I mean, this is, the consciousness of the process, and
the joy that we found in the process. Like, nobody told me that. I like to work. Maybe I learned it when I was a kid. I have no idea, but yeah.
I was just a research subject because I was so young when I started like working professionally. I was a research subject in a study that was being done on what they call prodigy children, when I was like 16 years old. And it was very interesting because their definition, as I was told it at that time, was they were looking for young individuals who had a capacity to focus for an indefinite period of time or extended periods of time, and it's just that prodigious ability to stay focused within that. And so I think, like you, I didn't think about it like I got joy from it because time went away, because you're focused on it and you're just sort of like so involved with everything that's going on, whether or not it's learning about your body or learning about a character or learning about how movement works, or whether or not you can do that pirouette. Like, I love the concept. You've got like, you have a camera and it's got 1,000 clicks in its lifetime, and you're trying to figure out how many clicks you can get through before it dies. It's like, so, if for me, I couldn't do a double tour to the left, I would do 50 more thinking at some point I've got to get rid of the ones that I can't do.
It's amazing. I love that. I love that idea. Keep doing it, because at some point, the thing you can't do will go away. It's a great concept. I've never thought of it that way.
Well, that's a math thing. I was like, I hated quadratic equations, but after I had done 500 of them, I actually understood them.
Okay, and I don't even know what they are, so I'm going to go to the next question.
I know, exactly.
So continuing a bit with Paul Taylor, but in the educational way. You have set and shared Paul Taylor dances with universities and professional companies such as Tisch NYU, New Zealand School of Dance, Beijing Dance Academy, the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theatre, American Ballet Theatre, Ruttenberg Dance Company, Queensland Ballet, Ballet am Rhein, and currently with the Volksoper Wien Staatsballett in Vienna. So again, let me see these questions, because we've been interweaving, and I love the way that it's flowed naturally. Well, I'll still ask the question, and maybe there's another way of looking at it. What is your process and how you pass on Taylor's ballets? when you teach them? I imagine you have a holistic approach, just knowing you for the time I've known you. I imagine you have a holistic approach when you teach them. The steps already imbued with the spirit, right? Um, is that correct? And this is a funny question. Are there anecdotes?
Oh, there are always anecdotes.
I
You know,
know.
we can't be in theater without anecdotes. If it goes well, you're really worried.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, I sign up to get a word a day sent to me by, these dictionary online things that you do. And I love the fact that just a couple of days ago, the word that came through was heuristic. Heuristic meaning that Heuristic, and it means learning by experiencing it for yourself.
Oh,
So
like
a heuristic approach.
Empirical.
Yes. Well, yes, it's empirical knowledge, but the practice is heuristic, where what you're doing is you're having to figure it out yourself.
I'm writing this word down.
Heuristic.
Heuristic. Beautiful. Okay.
And as I said before, when I am staging a tailor work, I learned this. I learned this approach from Anna Markard, who was Kurt Jost's daughter. Like, I was 19 years old and she was teaching Green Table and I was doing The Profiteer. And she showed us a video of the whole dance the very first day. And after that, she taught everybody their individual roles and steps, every single role and step. And that's the way that I teach a tailor dance. And it's a lot of work for me, but when you're working on a new work with a choreographer, he's working with you. Sometimes Paul would give us a step. Sometimes he'd improvise with us. Sometimes he'd give you the idea. Whatever it was, you had to physically figure out how to interpret what they were offering you.
Yes.
So if I do that with the dancers individually, it is a set work. So we know what the structure is, but them individually have to get inside of the work personally. So I will give you the information and I will help by coaching you through how you adjust into doing the movement. And so that continues my creative practice, because every person will need something different.
That's right.
It's like, and it helps me then start to build a relationship with the dancers and to say, look, it's like they need to just let go, or some of them just need to be a little bit more precise, or some of them don't want counts or music. They just want movement and phrase, and every single one is different. And the needs are different. There are some things that require more technique. And so we'll drop the choreography altogether and we'll start creating exercises that are just about giving them the technique, especially with the less experience. Okay, we're just going to do this across the floor, and it'll be repeating 2 steps 15 times, just so they get it into their body. And then slowly I'll let them improvise with that and then say, how could you put it together? And then I'll throw in the way that it works into the sequence. And then all of a sudden they'll realize, oh, I actually did that, But that sensation of you came up with it.
Yes. Ownership.
Yeah. They need to take that ownership sooner rather than later, not copy somebody else.
And you're so right. The way you teach, the way you're imparting knowledge is really akin to working with a choreographer.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
Wow. Because Paul's not here. He's not in the room. So I feel like I need to be as close as I can to offering what I got in order to get to the work.
Amazing. It's a beautiful way of teaching. I mean, it's really beautiful, Richard.
It's also exhausting.
Yeah, it's a tremendous. I'm just thinking about the work involved. Yeah, that's exponentially more work.
Yeah, I mean, I I think one of the dancers I had worked with before many years ago, was asking me about my process, and I said, for every hour and a half of rehearsal, I do 3 hours of prep.
Yeah.
Because it's literally, I just got to do it, and I have to do it the night before. I cannot do it far in advance because I cannot hold that much information in my head.
I'm the same way. Always homework at 9 in the morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
It's such an immediate experience, dance is.
Yeah.
Like my body doesn't feel like it did last week, especially because I'm so sore from the pandemic of staying still and home, for a year before I actually am back in the studio.
I know. Thank goodness for the walking. At least something got something going on. Some neurons got some attention.
Right.
So Richard, you have a thriving freelance teaching and mentoring career. As a master teaching artist, you led Paul Taylor's focus programs for the Ailey School, NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, the School of Alberta Ballet, Dance St. Louis, Young Dance Makers Company, New Orleans Ballet Association, the American Dance Festival, and the Taylor School. Intensives that you have taught from 1998 to present. What do you, that's a similar question. I feel like that's why we've been flowing. Let's see. Yeah, is there something different you learn in an intensive when you're just teaching? So you're not setting work. You're just in an intensive situation with kids. And I ask this, kids, you know what I mean, college people. Yeah. I ask this because I also teach the Forsyth improvisation technologies. Right. And each time I impart the information, I'm still learning from it. I still think, God, if I knew this then, but I don't do that anymore. But after so many years, I'm still learning how to impart this knowledge, still learning about that technique. Does the technique keep opening for you as well? And what of Paul's philosophies, other than the ones you've spoken about, if there's any others that you convey within these intensives?
I think when teaching younger dancers and training dancers, I also teach little kids, so that, you also have to take into consideration where they are in their learning abilities, and what's going to, for littler kids, I really sort of, it just needs to be fun, but we also have to start to learn to codify things. But I think when we're talking about, teenagers and young professionals, I often go back to how did we develop language, and what I learned from them is how they develop language. But I said, with Taylor, what I always find fascinating are the different approaches that come out depending on the students that I'm working with. So those that have no Graham background need a little bit more sense of control and breath and how that's working. The malleability of the spine. But the most important thing is that they have to become, and this is a Taylorized thing, people. Because Paul did not believe that you would watch somebody moving and not see a person. He was not someone who believed in dance as an abstract. He really said, you're a person. And I remember having a very hard emotional time with a dance career when I was in my 20s, because I had started so young, I realized I did not develop a sense of self. You know, I think, like I said before, I never did a work that was asking me to contribute like to the creation of it until I was like 20. And then I'd already done 5 years of like professionally dancing and working. And I realized that I could not have gotten into the Taylor Company when I was 20 years old. I needed to be 31 years old because then I had a sense of self. Then I knew who I was. I had left dancing and come back to it. I had gone around it. I had been independent. I had a perspective on who I was as a person. Mm-hmm. So what I kept learning and continue to learn, especially when I work with younger ones, is like how they do the movement and see that they can give an intent in a very different way than I might have thought, you know. But the genius of choreographers is those that can give you movement that can be reinterpreted and still project and not turn into chaos. I think that's what I learned from them.
Yeah, and you say it's a Paul thing about identity, right? But I'm really wondering if it's also working with the choreographer thing, because same thing with Bill.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the individual, that I mean, that's how we kind of came up with the improv technique. It was this group of individuals, and Bill, of course, but so exalting the individual. What do you have to bring to the table? And, you know, a lot of creators, a lot of choreographers do this, and especially the ones that get to be directors and choreographers. And you're right, it's getting less and less. Right. You know, I hope there's a resurgence again, perhaps after COVID, that, you know, because there's going to be a lot of shifts in our dance field, and I'm hoping that more choreographers get those places as directors as well, because I tell you, like you, because I started working with Bill at 19. Yeah. So like you, like I had to find myself through.
While you're in that process.
While I'm in the process, but I'm with a person that's saying, do it. Right. You know? So so what I'm trying to say is I bet you could have gotten a job with Paul at 20, but you would have found yourself with him. Do you know what I mean? I think there's an underestimation. Human beings are extraordinary beings, and when we're given the chance to have agency,
yeah,
a lot of great stuff happens. So, you know.
No, and I'm not saying that, you know, that my path was the only way that I would have gotten there.
No,
you know, it's I was also thinking in terms of the concept that so much dance training, I think, became about technique. It became about facility. It became about amplitude. And we lost the sense of really focusing on the synchronization and the meshing of all the components of intent, musicality, quality of movement. You know, I had great coaches, and one of my favorite coaches was Christopher Gable. And Christopher Gable was a principal at the Royal Ballet at the same time when Nureyev had defected, and he created the original Romeo in Macmillan's Romeo and Juliet with Lynn Seymour. And Christopher always said, you know, once you get out of the classroom, an arabesque is not an arabesque is an intent.
Yes.
Are you getting away from something? Are you going towards something? Are you pointing it? Are you representing it, but it's never just the shape.
That's right.
It's an intent. And that's something that, you know, I try very much to teach in class. Like, let's give our adage an intent. Let's give the allegro an intent. You can give your tendus an intent if you want. I mean, it literally is like, you know, just start to give it some kind of emphasis. You know,
Yeah. I use the word negotiation a lot now, and you know, and negotiating yourself within the context.
Yes, absolutely.
And also speaking about like the lusciousness of the feeling of using your body. I mean, just when you said tandu, I had this image of like going through my feet and seeing that, like, that you were pointing your leg and not just, yeah, I mean, okay, let's move on, because this is yeah. We're getting into the sensory situation, which I know both of us have an affinity for. Richard, completely different now. You've enjoyed so many avenues in your life, devoted to life's reimaginings. When I think of you also, travel is a big part of your life. And art for you, travel is a big part of your life, and art for you and connecting to the world. I know that. Can you speak to this? What outside of the dance endeavors has taught you? Which ones has taught you perhaps great lessons? What influences opened up new pathways for you? And please tell us about your kayaking business that you co-own and manage.
Okay, that actually is sort of exactly where I will go in terms of what took me out of dance.
Okay.
And then ultimately brought me back to it. It was the thing that we all feared as dancers, was injury. I got injured, and I will say in retrospect, I think that the injury was somewhat, it was somewhat this like unhappiness. It's like, I don't know who I am. I don't know why I'm doing this, and I'm working really hard. And so the only choice I felt like I could do was just to work harder. And I never gave myself a break. And then my body started to break. Yeah. So I ended up with a lower leg injury that I had to have surgery on. And a friend of mine had just taken up kayaking. And so I went and I started kayaking, and I literally got in a kayak. After my first day, I did 200 days in a kayak out of the first year. I literally every opportunity I could to get into a kayak. I loved it because it had this sensation of you're partnering with the water. The water itself became a partner that you had to react to, but at the same time, you had to get yourself to somewhere else, right? And so you're utilizing that sensation of what that is. At the same time, I met someone who had been doing contact improv I was working with an organization. I started to work with a kayaking organization that took people with physical disabilities kayaking.
Okay.
And so there was a gentleman who was there working, and a friend of his was a quadriplegic. And they worked in doing contact improv together in order to get people that had a physical disability to learn to view the world differently, like to experience. You don't have to stand up to sit down in a wheelchair. You can actually get into the wheelchair lying on your back, just roll into the chair. And because it's got wheels, you can then wheel yourself and rotate upright. So, he was using contact improv principles. And that was where I first started doing contact improv. And I had never done, like my first 3 years of contact improv had never been with an able-bodied person. It had always been with somebody with some kind of disability, either blind or paraplegic, quadriplegic, amputee, whatever it was like that. And I think what was so revealing to me was just how my knowledge of my own body got me inside of being more open. Like I had access quicker to understanding that I was taking advantage of my able-bodiedness and taking it for granted. Mm. And so then, as I came out of my injury and I started to work back into dance, I felt like I was a much more conscious mover. We had this experience of working with Irene Dowd and that whole idea of like letting the skeleton fall into place. But sometimes as dancers, we're so well trained to maintain aspects of our body that we don't just release into that, and we can't. You've got to find it in some way. So, that changed it physically. I have always had to change cultures. So I grew up in Jamaica, this wild, loud West Indian culture, and I go to England, which is cold and conservative. And then I come to the US, which is very aggressive and brash, but still quite conservative. And it's like changing cultures, I think, does two things for me, which was to become a little bit more maybe conservative about how much I let people know about me. And at the same time, I became much more communicative about what I needed. So, you pare it down to the essences of, and maybe this actually approaches how I go into the studio and why I can say, I actually need to not focus on the emotions that are flying around because of whatever's going on, like COVID and those frustrations and stuff. I really just need to focus on the work that we're doing and be careful and caring of the dancers and their emotions and not discount them, but at the same time, bring them back into the room and say, can we just focus on these three things? Yeah. Right? And I think that is a cultural thing. I think that is something that I've utilized with gaining the sense of, oh, they may not understand me because they don't know what my background is.
Mm. Yeah. Well, yeah, it goes back to like, judging someone. You can never know someone, especially even if you're a friend or an acquaintance. So leave judgment there, at least until you've had your first conversation. You've got to, you know what I mean? You have to get to know someone, and you don't
Right.
don't know someone.
No, and I don't like to think of myself as political, but I will say that there's been a lot going on about Black Lives Matter and now, Stop Asian Hate and stuff like that. And I have to say, it was only in the last 5 years that I ever experienced like walking down the street in New York City of all places and having someone attack me, like, and not know me at all just because of the way that I looked. And
wow.
And it occurred to me that it was that lack of even understanding that what you don't know may be the thing that saves your life.
Yes.
And it's like they're so angry and so looking for something to focus that on, but they're not recognizing that you don't know what it is that may make your life better.
That's right.
You know, and so there's that comes in, which again comes back to, because I know this, because I recognize this, sometimes the reaction, not that it's right, but my reaction is to apologize. It's to say, I'm really sorry. I understand that you're angry. And I'm sorry that I represent that for you. Let me get out of your way. And it's just a reaction. That's just a very, like, that is how I felt at that particular point in time. You know, it wasn't for me to get mad. It wasn't for me to push back. It wasn't for me to do that. But yeah, just that just came out. I was like,
well, the thing is, no, it didn't just come up. I can tell you've also, you know, I send you the questions and I can tell you've been looking at them, because it kind of flows to the next question, you know, in supporting and building a more equitable dance community. And I'm making it specific on purpose.
right.
What are some specific daily practices that we could be active with?
I would say, I'm going to go back to my first coach, Christopher Gable, who used to read J. Krishnamurti, who is sort of a, you know, he's a scholar and a philosopher. And one of those tenets was do something creative every day. But what the intent behind that is make a change. Anything, walk a different route to work. See what happens if you eat with your left hand if you're right-handed. You know, just do something that makes you think about what it is that you're doing, you know. And then as a dance community, think about what is it that you want to do that day as a dancer. It might be to focus on yourself. It might be to, you know, watch a video. It might be to get away from thinking about dance. But I think that sense of creativity is about being conscious. And with that consciousness comes courage, because it's scary. It's scary to not do what your habit tells you to do.
Yeah, the unknown, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. These are kind of the last two questions are kind of fun. Can you share, and I say spontaneous on purpose, because we are all a multitude of favorite or impactful memories, but can you share a spontaneous favorite or impactful memory from your creative life?
Again, I think because we've been talking about all these things that, you know, it's like I'm coming back to what sparked those particular kinds of ideas in me. So I go back to, it's the day before dress rehearsal. I am 20 years old and we're supposed to do dress rehearsal for the green table the next day. I am playing the Profiteer. And as this ballet is explained, it's an anti-war ballet. And the Profiteer is the only character of, like, you know, 14 characters. It's the only character that actually has evil intent. He is profiting from war. He's profiting from the fact that, you know, there's a homeless girl that he's going to sell her off into prostitution. You know, it's like, and death meets everybody else with compassion or understanding or just a certitude. but everyone else has a good conviction about why they're there, except for the profiteer. And in the background to all of this, Anna Marquardt has not taught me the last solo. This is the day before dress rehearsal. She has not taught me the last solo. So I finally get to learn the last solo, and I go out in the parking lot and I'm sobbing, right? I'm like 19 years old. I'm sobbing. I'm just like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't know how I'm gonna get through this. And she comes out and she sees me, and I'm like trying to dry my eyes, going like, you know, what is going on here? And she's looking at me. She said, "Are you all right?" She says, I feel like I'm just the most horrible thing in here, and I've only just learned the solo, and I don't know where it's going to go, and I don't know what. She said, "Stop. We are creating art. This is not real life." On top of which, every time I have given you something in rehearsal, the next day you've come back and you've improved it, or you've changed it and made it into your own. And I will tell you when you're going wrong. Trust yourself.
Beautiful.
Never forgot that lesson. And to this day, it's like, this is how we have to learn to be ourselves, not just artists or dancers. We have to learn to trust.
Yeah, beautiful. You kind of wrapped up that last question there too about insight. So, Richard, I mean, first of all, just so great to see your face, and
great to see you.
It's these interviews really afford a nice span of time. It's like a good, rich, long phone call, you know, but we get to see each other. So thank you so much for your totally inspirational, educational, and yes, joyful chat. Thank you so much. I want to direct viewers to find out more about you. Do you have a website, or are you on Instagram or something? And now I know you might not want people to find out more about you.
Well, no, it's not that I don't want people to find out more about me, but I will say that I love sort of being a little bit under the radar.
Yeah.
You know, when I'm doing stuff, I put it out on social media, and people know and they find out about it. And when I'm not, it's sort of, I almost shy away from self-promotion, you know? But, you know, certainly I'm easy to find the things that I have done because my name is pretty unique. Yeah. And so, you know, if anyone searches my name on the internet, they'll find wherever it is.
So do you have an Instagram handle, or do you have a?
My Instagram handle is at @RChensee, RCHENSEE.
Okay.
So,
great.
You know, so it's that's there.
So, and also in the description box below, there is a short bio from Richard, rather short. And you'll find out a little bit more about him there. We have new guests every week. Our next interview will feature Zoe Hagler, founder of Zoe, a Pilates studio, master Pilates teacher. This is my time of thanks. I want to thank Gracie Spina. Thank you so much, my dear, for this over a year long. This is almost a year-long journey now together. Thank you to the dance world for always giving me so much, holding me up. And Richard, just such a pleasure to sit with you.
Great
I learned
to see
so
you.
much today. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Bye.